From KGW News, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Senator Wyden, always a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
A lot of us were so surprised when we heard about the passing of Antonin Scalia, the Supreme Court Justice, last weekend. Tell us how you heard about it and what were your initial thoughts?
I was having a program in Medford talking about how we're going to fight opioid abuse in Oregon, and I walked out of the meeting and I was told that the justice had passed. And of course, all the senators were immediately asked for comment, and my first kind of response was, you know, this has got to be incredibly painful for the family to have a loved one die, apparently of natural causes, in such an unexpected way, and yet all of a sudden there was this huge debate starting essentially immediately. And what I have said is that first and foremost, I think Democrats and Republicans have a responsibility to handle this debate with the dignity that a position like this warrants. Now, there are pressing issues at the court, obviously, immigration, health care, but in a sense, this is very appropriate to have this debate now because the American people will see, in effect, how Democrats and Republicans conduct themselves on a matter of this importance.
A lot of people think of the Northwest as Bernie country. We saw you win big in Washington. However, a new poll out shows Hillary Clinton with a significant lead over you, 15 points, 48% to 33%. What do you make of that poll?
Not much. I think the fact that it is, this is an election in which independents can't vote. We do very well with independents. Makes our life a little bit more difficult. But my impression, having been to the beautiful state of Oregon on many occasions, having won the endorsement of Senator Jeff Merkley, I think we can win in Oregon. But again, what we need to see is non-traditional people sometimes do not vote, making sure that they are participating in this election. So I would hope that as many working people and young people understand that now is the time to stand up to establishment politics, establishment economics, and create an economy that works for all of us, not just the 1%. And by the way, the need to reform our broken criminal justice system and our corrupt campaign finance system. These are issues we have got to deal with, and that is what this campaign is about.
But you have opposed abortion rights, gay marriage. You voted as a state lawmaker in favor of voter ID laws, against a bill prohibiting discrimination based on sexual orientation. Very conservative views. Are those out of step with the average Oregonian?
Well, I don't know as far as them being out of step, but I'm very happy that you bring this up because women's issues are an important thing to me. Laurel, I'm the father of 8 daughters. And if one of my daughters came to me and said, I'm pregnant and I'm going to have an abortion, I would still love her, I would still hug her, I would cry with her, because this would probably be the hardest decision she's ever made in her life. But it's her choice, and it's her body, and that doesn't change. I'm pro-life, I mean, I understand that, but that is a personal viewpoint that has nothing to do with the Secretary of State's office. There is no social issues in the Secretary of State's office.
Do you want to respond to that?
Absolutely. This is the best example of the comparison between Dennis and Donald Trump. Donald Trump talks about groping women and then says, but I respect women, like you're supposed to believe that. Dennis talks about his support for women, but in the legislature votes against supporting victims of domestic violence and sexual assault.
You know, Brad, for you to talk about Donald Trump groping and then put me in that same sentence, that is offensive to me. You have attacked my honor, and I don't stand for that.
Well, actually what I'm doing is I'm highlighting your record, not your honor.
Yes. Do you agree or disagree with Mayor Hales' actions to allow camping in the city? If so, for how long would you let them camp? And if not, what do you do on day one? Because some of the things you're talking about take a long time. What do you do on day one of your term about people who have nowhere to sleep? And what about the Springwater corridor that people are so frustrated with all the camping there?
It's a lot in 60 seconds. I'll do my best. What I'm talking about in my plan on homelessness, some of it is about long-term solutions around housing, but some of it is about immediate help right now. And those are those shelter beds that I referenced that we're going to have open, hundreds of new beds. And that means that we're going to have places for people. And by the time I take office as mayor, I'm going to have a commitment to ensure that we have a balance between having enough shelter space connected to mental health and addiction services and the kinds of staffing and law enforcement that we need connected to social service workers so that we can do public safety on the streets, including in places like the Springwater Corridor. Right now, we don't have enough officers, we don't have enough resources. We have to have places for people to go and sufficient staffing to be able to keep our streets safe, because ultimately, people who are on the streets, they're looking for a pathway off the streets, and we need to give them that pathway.
You mentioned homelessness, and that is a huge issue in the state, and particularly in Portland. You attended a forum sponsored by the Oregonian last month. What is your take? If you were governor, how big a role would you play in trying to solve that problem?
A huge role. I also did a day where I went amongst the homeless, went to some of the homeless camps, went to the camp that's been there for 5 years outside of Chinatown on the Pearl District, talked to the people. We need to have zero tolerance on ourselves for allowing people to live in such conditions in Oregon at this point in time. And that's going to take a great consensus of state and local leaders. First thing, obviously, is to get people out of wretched conditions and into some kind of safe shelter, to bring in services right off to help them with their mental illness or their drug addiction or their depression, or just the fact they don't have enough money to be under reasonable shelter, to find out, again, how to elevate people if they're unable to work with that real focus on having the dignity of work. If you can get people to where they can work, you've solved most of their problems. You've solved their extreme poverty. You've solved a lot of their health issues, and you can really bring people together in that way. So I view it as a great partnership between state and local. And I know Ted Wheeler was there, and he had at the homeless conference, he said, I want to eliminate homelessness by 2019. That's a doable thing to do. And if I'm governor and Ted Wheeler is the mayor of Portland, we will end the majority of homelessness.
Would you be willing to commit more resources from the state?
You have to absolutely commit more resources. You have to have great new partnerships. I think the other key is you bring together private and public. The public can bring in a great floor of security to a program, and public philanthropy and public efforts can change lives.
A member of the city council in Dallas, Oregon, made news last November and faced some public backlash after a Facebook post bashing the Muslim faith as pure evil and a grave threat. And this is a quote from his Facebook page. In the past, he said, I'm all for diversity, and I'll be the first in line to fight for everyone's religious freedoms within reason. I just don't like religions or people that wish to kill me, wipe out our culture, and destroy our nation. And he posted that after 3 Muslim Americans were elected to city council in Michigan. That's got to be hurtful to hear that. How would you respond to somebody who feels that way?
When we received the first comment, about this elected official in the Dalles, my response was to invite him into our grand opening. So I picked up the phone and I called, I couldn't get his phone, his personal phone, but I extended an invitation to him and his council, to come and visit and get to know the Muslim community, whether they are in the Dalles or in Portland, Oregon. And the best way to combat his ignorance is, by engaging him in a positive, constructive way. But we shouldn't give up, we'll reach out again and again until he understands that, Muslims are humans like anybody else.
In the opening chapter, you talk about how the Grant community is a reflection of what's happening in the nation as a whole, that's grappling with a whole host of race issues. And I was surprised to find out, and you talk about the casual and common use of the word in the Grant hallways, and it's not just Grant High School, it's many other high schools. I mean, why do you think we're hearing that casual use of the N-word?
It's hard to say. Part of it, I think, is a generational gap, which we addressed in the issue. As far as race relations go, things are getting a lot more implicit. It feels like, especially at Grant High School, for high school students, we're not necessarily talking about race all the time, and so we don't think about the implications of our vocabulary of the words that we're using, and one, the history that they have, and two, the impact that they have.
Dave, do you think the students at Grant and other high schools know the meaning, the history of the word, the racism attached to it?
No, I don't think they do. I think you have pop culture, you have music, you have movies, TV shows, which are, you know, and anything on Netflix, you see these series come out where it's the today factor, I call it. It's what people are doing today. And then I think that spreads. I think you see people in our halls at school who are white, black, Asian, Latino, all sort of just throwing this around. And I think the problem that I see with that is if you don't know your history, if you don't know what's happened around this word and what's gone on in this country back in the, you know, dating back 200 years, then you're making decisions not based on all the facts. And I think we wanted to make sure that people knew the history and knew the currency of the word and show the diametrically opposed views.
I also had the pleasure of asking Malala questions in front of the Moda Center audience. We talked about her life before the Taliban and how Malala's father helped mold his daughter into the young woman we see today. Let's talk a little bit about your life before the Taliban in Pakistan. In your book, you describe the Swat Valley as one of the most beautiful, I think you say it's the most beautiful place in the world. You loved school, you had friends. Tell us a little bit about what it was like to grow up there.
So yes, Swat Valley is the most beautiful place in the world. And it has huge, tall mountains, lush green hills and trees, and it has most of all, nice rivers. And it was where I was born, and it was where my life was based. My father, he was a school principal, and in 1994, I think, that he started his own school with only 3 children.
In your book, you talk about reimagining and redesigning our city streets, and you've done some of that in New York City, and we have some before and after pictures to show with our viewers. If you talk about, the first one is Times Square, that so many people are familiar with, the before and after. Tell us what you did there.
Well, Times Square was a problem that had been hidden in plain sight for 200 years since the street grid was set up, and Broadway cuts through the Manhattan grid on an angle, and it does some great things, creates squares, but it creates these congestion hotspots and danger spots in the city. So what we did was something brand new, close Broadway to cars from 42nd to 47th Street, and prioritize the street for people, because 90% of the people that used that space that went through Times Square were on foot, and yet they only had 10% of the space. So it was really out of balance. And we did it to address the 350,000 people that were basically left on the side of the road. And we did it as a pilot program, and as Mayor Bloomberg likes to say, in God we trust, and everyone else bring data. So we brought lots of data to show how it worked, and we found at the end of the day that 80% of fewer people were walking in the street. We found motorist injuries down, we found pedestrian injuries down, and importantly, we saw a huge increase in business, and it became one of the top 10 retail locations in the world. And so we turned a place that was just about cars into a place for people that's worthy of its name, the crossroads of the world.
You may remember 2 weeks ago, we talked with Pacific University professor Jules Boykoff, who's a scholar on the Olympics. He's in Rio right now, taking in all the action behind the scenes. I talked with Professor Boykoff Thursday night from Rio to get his impressions so far. Professor Jules Boykoff, thank you for joining us again here on Straight Talk, this time in Rio.
My pleasure.
What's the atmosphere been like been there in Rio now that the games have been underway for about a week?
Well, it's interesting because it really depends on who you talk to. If you're in that Olympic zone behind me, people are feeling good, people are feeling excited about the sports. On the other hand, I've been to a number of protest events out there where people aren't quite so sanguine about the way the Olympics are playing out. In fact, there were 2 big protests on the exact same day that there was the opening ceremonies here in Rio de Janeiro.
Professor Boykoff, you wrote an article about the protests, and you titled it Olympic Calamity, and you talked about the thousands of people, and we talked about it here on Straight Talk a couple of weeks ago, the thousands who've been displaced to make way for the games. I'm going to read you a quote from your article, and we'll talk more about it. You said, standing nearby, one demonstrator told me it was ironic that while the team of Olympic refugee athletes was being wildly celebrated, the Rio Games has created numerous internal refugees, displaced in the name of 5-ring profit-making. Is that a common sentiment there with the locals?
Well, I was really intrigued by that comment by the protester because, as you know, one of the best feel-good stories from these Olympics has been the team of refugee athletes that took a very prominent role in the opening ceremonies. But this protester and many others have pointed out, I think quite rightly so, that some 77,000 people have been displaced to make way for the Games, and that those people should be of equal concern to the world community.